Hi everyone. The book I'm gonna be going over in this video is called The Cucumber Quest: The Donut Kingdom, and it's written and illustrated by GGDG. This book is the first book in a series that follows Cucumber and his sister as they travel throughout the kingdom to defeat the evil Queen Cordelia, who is up to no good. It's a comedic book. Also an adventure and fantasy book. That even though it follows a very comedic story, it has very deep, meaningful lessons, and it's also very useful to you teach in classrooms. One last feature about this book that is interesting that I'm going to go over later in more detail is the fact that it's a graphic novel. So it's not a regular book, but instead it's a graphic novel, how we went over in class. Alright, so to begin, a summary of the book. The story takes place in a world made up of food-themed kingdoms like the Donut Kingdom, as the title suggests. The story begins with a character named Queen Cordelia being shown about to collect all the stones to accomplish one of her evil goals. After this, we jump to our main character, who is named Cucumber, who's pictured here on the front. He's a quiet bunny who wants to enroll in a magic school. On the other hand, his sister is an adventurer and she loves adventures. And in fact, she's actually studying to become a knight. The day before Cucumber enrolls in magic school, he gets a letter from his dad explaining the situation and explaining that Queen Cordelia has taken over the castle and her objective is world domination. Even though Cucumber doesn't want to do this, Cucumber's dad tells him that it's his destiny to get the legendary Dream Sword and save the world. Cucumber doesn't want to do this, and even though his sister volunteers to do it in place of him, Cucumber is forced to go because, as his dad says, it's his chance to finally become a man. Not long after Cucumber goes out on his adventure, he gets stuck in a sticky situation, and Almond comes to save him. After this, they both go on the journey together. And they both go on a journey together to grab the Dream Sword. And on the way, they meet new friends and foes. Throughout, almost near the end of the book, Almond has a chance to end the story right there and then by hiding the last stone that Queen Cordelia needs. But instead, she decides to give it to her because she decides that it's too easy for the story to end like that, and she wants to go on an adventure. The book finally ends with the siblings and some new friends they made traveling to another kingdom to find someone who stole the Dream Sword. Okay, so on to a description of the visuals. The Cucumber Quest is very captivating. The author GGDG uses bright pastel colors, as you can see on this cover. And not only does she use it on this cover, it's included all throughout the book, as it is a graphic novel, which means that the whole book is made up of these beautiful images that we as adults like, and kids are gonna like even more. The settings and the characters are all food themed and they're animal themed. So the settings are gonna be food themed, and then the characters are all gonna be animal themed. Mostly in this case, bunnies and bears. And even though the art style is really pretty, it's also very detailed, as you guys can see. You can tell that every panel was drawn out, very carefully to explain what's going on in the story, and it follows, like what the characters are saying and what the dialogue says. And finally, I just want to add that the combination of text, so this combination of text and visuals, it makes it a great introduction for graphic novels for children, and to keep adding material like this into our classes, as it is an easy read, but it still has a lot of meaning, deeper meaning that we can get from individual images and dialogue. So, onto the genres of this book. This book fits into several categories, but I'd definitely say three are the ones that stand out the most. First, I'd say it's definitely a fantasy book because, it has magic, kingdoms, and a classic hero, Cucumber, a classic hero storyline. Second, I would say it's a comedy or even a parody because it makes fun of like the typical hero tropes that we see in other stories where the hero character is always brave and he wants to set out on the adventure. The humor, I would say, it's pretty playful, and it's pretty funny because it even makes fun of itself in some ways. Finally, the last and most important genre for this book is that I would say it's a graphic novel, which means that, as we learned in class earlier this week, that it relies on images and some text to give a deeper meaning of what's happening in the story. So, on to my favorite quote of the story. My favorite quote of the story is found on page 19, and it's after Cucumber set out on his journey. He is met up by the Oracle, who's going to tell him what he needs to do to finish. So, while talking, Cucumber actually he says, "Oh, you want my little sister. She's even training to become a knight." And the Oracle says, "Little sister? No, 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 dear. Little sisters aren't legendary heroes." Huh? And well, this is my favorite quote of the story for two reasons. First of all, because it shows that how much Cucumber believes and loves his sister, and he knows that she's a better fit for this adventure and to be the hero. The second reason I love this quote is because the fact that the Oracle says little sisters aren't legendary heroes. And this is very, like, it's a kind of like a joke that the story makes, making fun of the fact that all other hero stories are always about, the older brother or, a man being the hero. And so this story kind of like pushes that trope onto people, even though Almond is going to end up being the hero or like the knight of the story instead of Cucumber. All right, so on to the strengths and weaknesses of this book. First of all, for the strengths, I'd say is the humor and the creativity of this book, just because it's a very funny and witty book. Also, the world building is creative. All the characters are unique, and it will intrigue younger children into this world. Another strength of this book is the artwork, just because it's very beautiful. A kid will easily see this and want to pick it up and keep going. Also, another strength is the theme of the book, just because it promotes teamwork, courage, and it promotes equality, gender equality specifically, just because like usually in the stories, how I mentioned before, the hero's always a boy, and he's a courageous boy. But in this case, Cucumber isn't the most courageous, but his sister is, and his sister's ready to be the hero. So, they both embark on this journey together. And lastly, the biggest strength I'd say of this book is that it's a graphic novel. Since it includes, all these images throughout the book, it's a quick and easy read for classrooms. And it's something that kids will be like, oh, I want to read this, as opposed to, a regular book that's just purely words. One of the weaknesses of this book would be also the comedy in it, just because sometimes it's a little bit mature, and some kids wouldn't understand it fully if they aren't old enough. Also, another weakness of the book is that since it's the first book of this series, it's a little slow, and not much happens in this book, just because it's setting up what's actually going to happen in the future. As a in regards to the ages it's appropriate for, I would definitely say maybe grades 2nd through 6th, or grades 2nd through 6th, just because I do recognize that it's a little higher level when it comes to reading, but at the same time it can go up until 6th grade, just because the comedy is a little bit more mature, so some of the younger grades might not be able to understand it. But with the help of a teacher, they would be able to understand, most of what's going on. Okay, so on to an activity that could be done using this book in a classroom setting. One that I thought of was where children would basically follow, kind of what happens in this story, and design their own kingdom and their own characters. So they would basically draw out their respective kingdoms, and the respective characters that they want to include in this story, in their own kingdom. And also at the end of it, they could write a short paragraph, explaining, the main idea of their kingdom, including the name of their kingdom, the characters, and buildings and what's going on in the kingdom. If you want to go even deeper, kids could create their own graphic novel, basically following, what's going on in this story. So they could, using their own kingdom, they could create their own graphic novel following an event that goes on in their own kingdom that they built. This would really help with students, uh, creating dialogue, and then at the same time critically thinking about which pictures would fit perfectly within their graphic novel that they decided to write. So in conclusion, I thought The Cucumber Quest, The Donut Kingdom by Gigi DG was a great book, just because of all the elements that it includes. It includes adventure, comedy, and it's a graphic novel, which is intriguing to kids. On top of that, it has deep themes about, defeating gender roles and being courageous, and believing in teamwork. I think that this book would be a great addition to anybody's library, just because of all of these elements that I mentioned. On top of that, finally, it can lead to a lot of different classroom activities that would be useful to teach kids. Thank you for listening to me.